Hello, and welcome to A Dash of Salt. I'm Dr. Shelley Ann, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you stumbled upon this podcast by accident or you're here because the subject drew you in, welcome. SALT is an acronym for Society and Learning Today. This podcast was created as an outlet for inviting fresh discussions on sociology and learning theories that impact your world. Each episode includes a wide range of themes that focus on society and everyday learning, whether formal or informal. So let's get stuck in, shall we? Welcome to A Dash of Salt. Today I'm joined by Ahla Tunji Solola. Tunji was born in Nigeria and immigrated to Ireland with his mother, father, and younger brother when he was 5 years old. His father is a social worker and his mother is a nurse. Tunji is now 21 years old and a second-year student at Maynooth University in the Biotechnology program. In addition to being a full-time student, Tunji works part-time at TK Maxx in Blanchardstown, and in his spare time, he likes hanging out with his friends and keeping fit. I'm so happy to welcome you as a guest on my podcast today and to speak with you about living, learning, and growing up Black in Ireland.
Thank you so much for having me. Just discuss everything, kind of get into my whole experience of being Black in Ireland.
So we'll start right off here. You arrived here in Ireland with your family in 2005 or around 2005, just before starting primary school. Can you tell us a little bit about what you remember about arriving in Ireland to live and what you were feeling and experiencing?
Wow. From what I can remember, it was definitely an experience. I just remember it feeling very new in a sense. It felt very different. And that's just the kind of the atmosphere of just being in a different country in general after being used to something else. So being there, I just remember like feeling very new, like kind of getting used to my surroundings, and then just to go on. But then starting school was a whole different story. School was interesting to say the least. I probably say myself, I probably had some behavioral issues starting off at such a young age because of having to change and a whole new environment, being surrounded by kids I don't know. So it was an adjustment, but I eventually did adjust.
And that's actually a really great observation to make, even at that very early age, that it would have probably come as much of a shock to you, coming to a whole new country with new cultures and new people, new ways of looking at things, but trying to understand those at 5 years old, at the tender age of 5, but then also I'm sure having other people back in 2005 looking at you, oddly as well, in your neighborhood, in your community. And I do want to get definitely more into, sort of the educational piece and what you experienced, as you went through schooling. But first, I wanted to ask you, now that you're a grown man, do you identify, how do you identify yourself? Do you identify more as a Nigerian living in Ireland or a Black Irishman or something else? And why?
That's an interesting one, because I don't really put much thought into kind of identifying myself, because then I feel like once I start being like I'm a Black Irish or I'm Nigerian, I feel like it kind of puts me in a box, if that makes any sense. So if someone did just ask me how would I describe myself, I would just say I'm Black. Like I define myself as Black Irish, Nigerian, African Irish. I would just say I'm Black, or originally from Nigeria.
And really, you've lived here in Ireland longer than you have in Nigeria. And so that was one of the reasons why I was asking you that question, was because, you've been here in Ireland. Do you consider yourself Irish?
Definitely. I do have an Irish passport, so I would consider myself Irish. But yeah, I would consider myself Irish, but I still have a lot of love for Nigeria, for my home. So in a sense, I would probably consider myself Nigerian first, then Irish.
Okay. That makes sense. And it's good that that you have the ability and the desire to want to embrace both cultures, which me coming from an American perspective, that is what a lot of immigrants, people who, or second generation, people that have come from other countries in the past. That's actually from the American perspective, how they would, identify themselves or relate themselves as I'm Asian American, or I'm, African American, and over the years and that culture, it would be that way. But because the immigration is such sort of a very new, relatively new element here in Ireland, it's just very interesting to hear how immigrants would consider themselves here.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk a little bit about, I want to kind of get sort of the elephant into the elephant that's in the room. I want to get it out there so that we can have these conversations as we go through the rest of our questions in our conversation together. So I want to talk about microaggressions, and I just want to explain for the listeners, what microaggressions are, and then ask you a quick question on that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about othering, and I'm going to ask you a question about that, and then we'll get into the bits and pieces of your own lived experiences. Okay. So microaggressions are, those everyday verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights or snubs or insults that people get, whether somebody intends to do them or whether they're done unintentionally. Um, they often sort of communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to the other person, and they target people based solely upon their marginalized group membership. So, can you tell me about racism that you have experienced growing up in the community that you've lived?
Yeah, from an early age, I wasn't too aware of it and I didn't pay attention to it that much. It wasn't until I got into my teen years that I started to look back and realize, oh, that was a microaggression, or oh, that felt a bit wrong. So just to give you like an example of a story, so when I was around, I would maybe say 8 or 7, I remember my house was raided by Gardai, because apparently they got an anonymous tip that we were doing something illegal. But the whole situation now, looking back on it, it feels like a microaggression, because I do remember we were the only black family on that whole street. So for someone to give the guy a tip that we were doing something illegal felt very strange, especially since it was a single mother with 2 kids that were 9 and 7 at the time.
Mm.
So I don't know how many single mothers with 2 kids that are dealing drugs or doing something illegal. Yeah, especially at that time when we all didn't have Irish passports as well. Yeah, that whole situation just felt, looking back, and it felt like a microaggression, and especially how the guy D handled it as well.
Mhm.
My mother she called and she asked, why did they do this? Because like they left our house in a complete mess.
So they did it when you weren't home. They went in and did
Yeah,
this when
yeah,
you were
yeah. They did it
when
when we
nobody
weren't
was
home.
home. Okay.
Yeah. So like when we came back to our house, our door was wide open, and we were like, oh, we assumed that we had, like, the house had been broken into.
Mhm.
But upon investigation, we found that rice bags had been slashed, wardrobes had been turned upside down, windows were broken. So my mother obviously realized that it wasn't a burglary. There's something more here. And then so she got in contact with the guard, and they explained that it was a raid, because they were suspicious of things going on in the house.
So they didn't actually even have the decency to like leave a note or to contact you or leave something in
Yeah,
some.
they did. Yeah, they left a note with a number, but they didn't explain anything in the note. They just
Oh,
left a note. they explained that they were Gardai, and they left a note with a number. Yeah, and my mother followed up on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I am so sorry that had to happen, that happened to your family. That it's just it's shameful. It's just disgraceful that, that you would be left that way, especially to come home and feel like, oh my goodness, we've been broken into. You actually feel like you've been violated in some criminal way, but when in reality you had been violated in a non-criminal way that felt a criminal way, if you get what I'm saying.
I get you. Yeah, I get exactly what you mean.
I know that you're probably also familiar with the concept of othering. And it's a little bit different than microaggressions, because othering refers to the processes like whereby individual or groups of people actually attribute negative characteristics to other individuals or groups of people and set them apart as representing that which is opposite of them. The thing about othering is that it's not about liking or disliking somebody. It's really based on that conscious or again, unconscious assumption that certain identified groups pose a threat to the favored group. And it's largely driven by politicians, by media. We see it a lot in Twitter and, in the news, areas and on social media, as opposed to personal contact. And here's the interesting thing, that overwhelmingly people don't know the other people that they're othering against. Yeah. So what are your thoughts and experiences of this specifically?
Yeah, well, I didn't feel othering in primary school, because the primary school that I went to happened to be in a very diverse area in Blanchardstown, part of Blanchardstown. So there were a lot of different ethnicities, a lot of people from different countries. So I never felt like an other. It wasn't until I moved when I was around 11, and I moved to an area called Finglas in northern Dublin. And I remember going from I'd say a school of 50% foreigners and 50% Irish to a school of about 5-10% Irish. And, you just not to put anybody to blame, but instantly you feel different. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? You feel as you it was at that time that I began to be conscious of being a minority. Because, as a child, you kind of live in your own little world, your own little bubble of you only know the people around you. And, if the people around me are like this, everybody else must be like this. I thought everybody else was everywhere else in Ireland was 50% Irish people, 50% foreigners. And then I get to the new school, and I remember in my specific class, there was, two black kids, me and another kid. So we were the only two in our class. And in the other class, so I came in sixth class, if you understand what sixth class is. Mm-hmm. So that's the final year of primary school. Yep. So I went in the final year of primary school. And so in the whole of the sixth class, so about 60, 70 students, there was three black kids and one mixed race. So instantly I began to be conscious of being a minority, specifically around that time.
Yeah. And I went to school way, way, way eons ago when I was in high school, which would be post-primary school for you here. I lived in a very rural community in upstate New York, and there were only two black students in our whole entire school. So that would be 9th through 12th grade. So 4 years, of schooling there. Yeah. The black family that lived there, that were the two boys that were in the school. They lived in Penn Yan, their whole lives. And but yeah, it was it almost felt like, looking back on it from, again, my lived experience, almost as if the black person was a novelty. Having, I can't think of a better, a nicer word to say, but it was almost like, the token black family of the community, or I'm sure you know what I'm saying.
That it's funny you say that, because even for you, back when you were in high school, as we were just explaining, which is a a few years ago in New York, somewhere that's pretty diverse. Um, so as I was explaining with primary school, when I went into secondary school, it was even worse. Secondary school was when I really got to understand it, because when I went to the secondary school, so the kid that I was telling you about that was in my class, so we went to the same secondary school, and when we got to that secondary school, we were the only two kids. We were only two black kids in the entire school of about almost 400 kids.
Mm.
And I think maybe like 10 foreigners, like people that weren't black. So as soon as I got to that school, the token feeling, you know what I mean? I began to really notice it, and certain kids would there was one of three responses, right? So it would be, so a lot of these kids have never had a black person in their whole primary school in their growing up. So there's one of three responses. There was kids that wanted to be your friend because they just wanted to be your friend. They thought you were a cool person. Kids that treated you differently, and kids that treated you as a token. So kids that wanted to be your friend simply because of the fact they could be like, I have a black friend, or and kind of, you know, wouldn't it be funny if I had a friend that was black? You know what I mean? So that was one of the three responses I really noticed when I got into secondary school.
Mm. And this was the treatment of yourself by students, or
Yes,
just sort
yes.
of the interaction by students. And I'm sure you're going to tell me some more stories as well. But again, from my own experience, just because it's my way of sort of setting myself up to understand, where you're coming from as well. But a colleague of mine, so a teaching colleague, during a small group teacher meeting, was discussing an interaction with a student of his. And he referred to him in hushed tones as, the black fella. And I immediately thought, why are you whispering? Why say it like it's something sinister, that there's something sinister about the color of the student's skin? And it immediately infuriated me. Because why does a discussion about a student, any student, but in this case, have to include the student's skin color? And I started really to question my colleague, which is again another thing that that you probably have seen and experienced. But I started questioning my colleague, but I was quickly silenced by a senior colleague that was in that same group meeting. And this actually has happened to me a lot in professional circles when I actually try to openly, discuss difficult conversations in professional circles. And but that whole idea of dismissing me or shushing me, that attitude, like, shh, let's not talk about it, let's pretend that didn't just get said, or that didn't happen. And the thing that bothers me the most is that doesn't make it go away. In fact, what it actually does is it gives the impression that what he said is okay, and and it's never okay. And so I'm interested in your experiences over the school years. Did you what types of experience did you have with racism as a student in your schools?
Yeah, as you were just explaining with your colleague speaking in hushed tones, that was one of the things I really realized, because Irish people, for the for the most part, they, cause immigration is so new, they just don't know how to deal with other races. They don't understand microaggressions. They don't understand, how just how to deal with other ethnicities in general. For example, like in secondary school, obviously they had policies to stop bullying and racism, stuff like that. So faculty or the teachers would treat every student the same, as you should. But when you look deeper into that, there's certain things, like there's certain things that are different about people of different ethnicities. If you get what I'm saying, it's like, for example, I just think I would have appreciated if there was somebody who understood who understood what it was like to be Black. So like, trying to like speak to teachers or explain your experience to a teacher, and they just don't understand, like, because they're trying so hard to put up the I don't see color type of thing. They're trying so hard to maintain that, whether when it's like you should see color, and seen as though I'm one of the only two Black people in the school, you should see color and you should be trying your best to make sure that integrated well. And so like little things like school policy. So the school I went to had certain policies around hair, right? So you couldn't have your hair too short and you couldn't have your hair a certain way. So, but it was clear that this policy was written from a white person's point of view because the kids that go to our school are white. So this policy doesn't work for me because, for example, so the white kids would cut their hair, and so the policy was you can't have it too short on the sides. So white kids would cut their hair and they'd cut it a certain way, and it was still fashionable. It was still cool because it was written from a white kid's point of view. It just wasn't too out there. It wasn't too crazy. It still fit in the school policy. Whereas for me, fashionable hairstyles for Black kids don't fit in that school's policy. So for the entirety of secondary school, I had to have a certain haircut that fit in the school guidelines that I didn't particularly want or wasn't particularly fashionable at the time. It's not a big issue, but it just goes to show the kind of sometimes this idea of I don't see color or treat everybody the exact same, it doesn't work. Like I remember one time I decided, you know what, I don't care. I'm gonna break the school policy, and I went with a fashionable haircut and suspended straight away.
Really?
Yeah, came to the school doors because I remember I was at the barbershop with my dad the day beforehand, and I was speaking to my dad about it, and my dad was like, do you think your school have an issue with it? And I was like, I'm not too sure. I don't think so. And my dad said, you know what? It's fine. You can get the haircut. So I got into school the next day, walked into the door, sat in my first class. Teachers took me out instantly, went to the principal's office, suspended for I think it was 2 days. And then I came back. There's nothing I could do. I still had the haircut, but I'd been suspended. I'd missed 2 days of school for nothing.
Yeah. And then of course it's a mark on your record,
Exactly.
as well. And then suddenly Tunji becomes a behavior problem.
Yeah.
Which, obviously you are not a behavior problem. And obviously you are a stellar student, who has gone on and is, working through your higher degree now. But anyway, and I think the thing that just floors me is that, Black hair is, like you were saying, it's not the same as white hair. And, expecting you to conform physically to the ways in which haircuts are, for white hair is absurd to actually even think about, not even to talk about that. What about the cultural, what about any religious aspects that may have come into play with, the way in which you keep your hair, or the way in which some school children that go to school, why are we asking people to culturally conform to the culture that they live in, and not be able to continue to identify and embrace their own culture in the schools?
Exactly.
That was a really good point that you made there. Do you feel in secondary school, do you feel that you were taken, actually in school in general, do you feel like you were taken seriously as a student?
I think for the most part, yes. I think like I was saying before, teachers were trying their best, but they were looking at it from a point of view of treat everybody the same. So that didn't necessarily work. So I was always heard. Teachers never ignored me, but there was always more that they could have done to make sure that I was integrated well, and I was, I was enjoying my time in the school.
That's really good to hear. Do you feel that your teachers made you feel included then? That they didn't separate you, but made you feel like you were an inclusive part of your classes as you went through?
Yeah, absolutely. For the most part, that's one thing I would give the teachers and principals. Although they didn't do it from a viewpoint that I would have preferred, they tried their best with what they knew. They never made me feel like I was an other. They never excluded me in any way. They
Mm.
tried their absolute best.
You said that they didn't do it in the way in which you would have liked them to do. What would that have looked like?
So, just teachers trying harder to just understand that, you know, understand that to the rest of these kids, my not much so for them, but to the rest of these kids, I'm different. I'm a minority. I'm something that's different to them. So I just feel like if the teachers had understood that and kind of worked around that, it would have prevented a lot of issues that I had with certain behaviors of students, or it would have made my time in the school a lot smoother if they're just like, picked up on little things or being a bit more aware. Like for example, um so if kids had running jokes amongst themselves, or like kids would make comments about other kids, or they would say certain, little racist things, stuff like that. The teachers, in their effort to try and treat everybody the same, they just saw that as, kids are just being kids. They're messing with each other. They're messing around. They're being kids. They're having fun. Rather than look at it as, here's a few kids saying something about one kid that's different to the rest of the kids. Maybe we should stamp that out. Maybe we should make sure that we look into that.
Mhm.
But they were kind of stuck in the whole thing of we have to treat everybody the same. They're probably just, kidding around. Let's not make a big deal out of it. So I just feel like if there was someone or a way I could talk to, I could talk to someone to just make sure that I felt, you know seen and heard all the time. I felt like I was fully integrated. I feel like
Yeah,
that would have just been a lot better.
yeah. Like your voice wasn't being heard,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is a problem for a lot of students, but I can definitely see why more so than ever it's not something that's heard for, minority students.
mhm,
How was cultural difference and race taught? I know I'm taking you a couple years back now because you've been
yeah.
in university for a while, but
Mhm.
how was cultural difference and race taught represented in your schools?
It wasn't. It wasn't really taught. Um, we had we had a subject. I think it was CSP. I can't even remember. I think it was like civic, social, political education. I think that's what it was called. And we would kind of skim over culture, like briefly, and then it was mostly about politics and civic duty and how the world works, and it would briefly skim and talk about cultures and different types of cultures. But yeah, like it wasn't taught at all. And
Mm.
then we had a religion class as well. So from the first 3 years of high school, because I know in America you guys have middle school.
Yep.
Yeah, so over here it's just one big secondary school. It's just 1 to 6. Everybody's
Yep.
in the same. So from 1 to 3, we were taught religion. So and then in religion class, we were supposed to be learning about world religions, different types of religions. But the school I went to was a Catholic school, so 80% was Catholic teachings, and then the other 20 we might talk about Judaism, we might talk about Hinduism, and that was it.
Yeah. So there was no representation other than maybe just to say this, there's this, there's this, there's
Yeah,
this, you
yeah,
know. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
But it was the Catholic way or the
yeah.
highway.
Yeah, and then in CSP as well. Like I said, there was a brief mentions of other cultures, and if we did talk about other countries, it would be from a third world point of view. It would be for example, they would talk about Africa and Asia as just Africa or Asia. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like people never talk about Europe as just Europe. They talk about Ireland, England, Belgium. If we were talking about Africa, it was just Africa,
Yeah.
or if we're talking about it was just Asia. So yeah.
Yeah, so it wasn't about it, and I'm assuming that probably the discussions never actually really talked about the integration of cultures, but rather this culture is in this country or this
Yes.
continent,
Yeah.
and this culture you would see here in this particular area, but not actually make any mention that the cultures are here in the communities and in your schools even in which you live.
Yeah.
So you did touch on this earlier, but currently they're actually only a very small, I've done a little bit of digging and research, and there's only a very small handful of teachers of color in schools in Ireland today. And by small, I mean less than 5 that I'm aware of. So I think there was only 4 that I've been able to find names of, although interestingly enough, also in Ireland, there's no formal record that's kept of teacher ethnicity.
Yeah.
Big surprise.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the whole thing I was saying of they're so stuck on treat everybody the same. We really don't want to be cut out. Like, I feel like they're just so afraid of being called racist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That they'll do stuff like not record how many black people are in the teaching service, which is kind of wrong when you really think about it.
Yeah, it definitely is. And there's actually a professor his name is Dr. Rory McDade, and he's out of Marino College. And he advocates for more migrant teachers and more teachers of color to be represented in schools. And he's got the Migrant Teacher Project that he's working on now. And he says, and I'm quoting him here, he says that recruitment into teaching is very conservative, and that many school principals and boards of management, when they're recruiting a teacher, are looking for someone who will fit in and not rattle things or present a challenge. He believes that this has to change, and that with diversity comes difference that can be enriching. And of course, I completely agree with him. I follow him on Twitter. I follow the Migrant Project, because also interestingly enough, I would be considered a migrant teacher, because migrant teachers are, so they're not just people of color, but they're also people that come from other countries that are struggling to actually be able to get permanent teaching contracts here to be able to teach in Ireland. So again, I really do agree with him, and also what he's advocating to do. But also the census that was the last census was 5 years ago, and the next one's coming up in 2022. It actually indicated that more than 125,000 people of color identified themselves as Irish nationals. And so my question for you is, growing up here in Ireland, do you feel that there are role models for you, and why or why not?
In terms of role models that look like me, no.
Mm-hmm. No.
Because like we were talking about earlier, immigration in Ireland wasn't really a thing until the 90s.
Yep.
So pretty much I am in it, like, maybe just 10 years behind, but I am that first generation.
You are.
So
Yeah.
I would be the role model in a few years to come for the kids coming after me. So growing up, I didn't really have any role models that looked like me that were Irish.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully in the future, I would be one of those role models, because I came from that initial batch of immigrants, that came through the early 2000s and early 90s as well.
Yep. And again, you did really well in school, and you're in your second year in biotechnology, and what's that? Going into the third year.
About to start my third year. Yeah.
Yeah, about to start your third year. That's right, because I forget it's June now.
Yeah.
So to what or to whom can you attribute your educational success to?
Wow, my parents, definitely. Yeah, My parents are big, are huge on education. Yeah, they for like because my mother, being a single mother in Ireland, when we were growing up, she went to DCU, so she went to college in Nigeria, graduated, and then moved here, and then obviously her credentials didn't transfer,
Yep.
so she had to retrain. So, you know, she went to college again with two kids, studied nursing, graduated, did a master's, I think a year or 2 years ago. And then my dad as well came here in 2013 or 2014 after not being able to travel. The whole so he couldn't get the papers to come and join us until about 2013 or 2014. And between 2014 and 2021, he had become a social worker in that space of time. So yeah, my parents are big on education. Like for them, education is everything because they were lucky enough to have to have education because back then when they were growing up the 80s, like 80s of Nigeria, education wasn't as big of a thing. So it was only certain kids from wealthier backgrounds that got the chance to go to college. So my dad came from not wealthy, but he came from upper middle class background, and my mother came from a middle class background. So they were lucky enough their parents pushed them to go to college at a time when not many people were going to college. So they made sure that that was instilled on my brother and I, and we were kind of told that like college is the step. Like you have to just do it. You have to try your best. You know, just do whatever you can to get through college.
And then that would be predominantly the case, would it not be, of Nigerian immigrants that come in here to
Yes.
Ireland, are
Yeah.
highly
Yeah.
educated, but they
Mhm.
struggle to be able to get the jobs that they
Yeah.
would have credentials for because
Mhm.
of bureaucracy and being told that that your credentials don't translate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then you're here, and then what do? You have to find work doing something,
Yeah.
which perpetuates the stereotypes that are given now to immigrants of varying skin colors and
Yeah.
nationalities that are given for people that want to immigrate here.
Yeah. Yeah. That definitely. And I think um my mother kind of really instilled that work ethic in me because I remember, from as soon as she got here, her first job was, I think she was washing dishes as her first job. So from washing dishes, she worked in retail. She did loads of little odd jobs here and there while she was in college until she got into college and then eventually graduated and then became a nurse. So I was really always had this mindset of keep working. Like if you can do something, go for it. Just try your best.
And do you feel that now that you're in university, do you feel that racism is less prevalent in higher education, or do you experience it there too?
Um, in university, I think it is a lot less prevalent because I feel like university is such a big place. Nobody really has time, you know, to be racist in a sense. And, you have black people coming from everywhere. You know what I mean? You have black people from all parts of Dublin. You have black people from even outside Dublin. They're all, everybody's going to college. So you get to mix with loads of different types. It's um, kind of like a meeting point. All the minorities that were kind of dispersed all around Dublin. As soon as college, and as soon as we get to college, it's like everybody meets at college, and we all get to mix with each other and talk about our experiences and.
And from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that Black people face here in Ireland?
Uh, I think the biggest challenge would probably be being heard because we have almost zero representation in government. I think we have a little bit of representation in government, but not a lot. So I think it would be being heard and just microaggressions in general, because you know it would really be only my generation. Well, yeah, my generation. I've only really been the generation of Ireland that have grown up with immigrants, that have seen immigrants their whole way growing up. You know, you go to I'm 21. You go to 30, and people that are 30, I can guarantee almost 100, like 90% of them had did not grow up with foreigners. So I think it's just the issue of it's just microaggressions and little acts of racism, because a lot of Irish people still don't know that certain things are racist, or certain things make people feel uncomfortable. So I feel like as more Black people come, as they probably will do, um, yeah, the generations coming up after me will definitely be more used to it, and there will definitely be a lot more acceptance.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that older people here in Ireland are the ones that probably struggle more with
Yeah,
immigrants and immigration, and
definitely. Yeah,
and and people of color, and
yeah. Mhm.
all of that, people of other nationalities. Um,
Yeah.
so what do you think that we can do better, and what can be done to educate better in schools?
Obviously, as we touched on before, I think representation is so important. Just trying your best to get more, different types of faces in education. Um, I'm sure they already have some programs in place to help teachers deal with um, having minority students, but I feel like maybe they could add more to the programs, make the programs a bit more all encompassing, maybe make it more hands on, to just make sure that teachers kind of really have an understanding of, these are the most important years of these kids' lives. So have making sure that they feel included, making sure that they feel integrated all the way through that will be amazing for these kids. So I think that those are really the two most important things.
And what about in society? What can be done to um, create a more inclusive society, and to educate society members to be more inclusive?
Yeah, I think if I'm going to be honest, I think Ireland is really trying. I think it's trying because, especially in the last 10 years, they've really tried. Certain adverts, on buses, on posters, on TV, even, they really are trying. I'm just not sure if the message is reaching as much as they think it is.
Mm.
So they are really trying. It's just that I'm not sure if the medium that they're using to convey the message is as effective as it could be.
And what
Yeah.
do you plan to do with your future? So once you graduate from university, what's next in the cards for you?
I think after I graduate, I'll probably immediately do my master's, and then beyond that, I've been thinking about it. Obviously, I'd love to. I'm studying biotechnology, so I'd love to be in the pharmaceutical industry, an industry that I know there isn't a lot of Black people in Ireland. And I have considered it. I'm still not sure, but I have thought about it a little bit. Maybe trying my hand at politics, but I'm not too sure yet. But I have thought about it a little bit, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. We'll see what we get there. But
I'm
yeah,
gonna be watching you though. I'll be
I
watching.
have. Thank you. But yeah, I have thought about it.
So as we wrap up our discussion together, what's the primary message that you want to be heard, and that you hope that our listeners are going to take away from your conversation today?
Yeah, so I think what I would want people to kind of consider is that foreigners in general, not even just Black people, need more of a platform in Ireland to get their points across, because a lot of the time, for us to be taken seriously or get our points across or even be heard, it has to go through the medium of an Irish person before our points are heard, rather than going directly from a minority to the audience. So I think yeah, just in general, trying as best as possible to allow Black people to, minorities to have a platform in Ireland.
Tunji, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you
And
so much.
I'm going to be so interested in where you go from here, and I would love to see you be involved in politics in some way. I think you definitely have a very positive way of advocating for marginalized groups, minorities, foreigners, immigrants, in general. And I think that you have a voice that needs to be heard as well. So thank you for joining me today. Thank you for being part of the conversation. And I really wish you all the very best in the future. And I look forward to having you on again in the future to see how you're getting on with with having your voice heard.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great opportunity. You've been an important person, really letting me get my message across. So just thank you so much for allowing me to have this platform.
I hope that you've enjoyed this discussion on A Dash of Salt, a space where you'll always find fresh and current discussions on society and learning today, seasoned with just the right touch of experts in education and a dash of sociological imagination. Please be sure to like and share this episode, and don't forget to subscribe to A Dash of Salt on Podbean so that you don't miss the next episode. Thanks so much, and we'll chat again soon.